You are a mid-level analyst at Lehman Brothers, and it is Sunday night, and the bailout is not coming. That is the sentence running through your head over and over as you sit at your desk on the 31st floor of 745 7th Avenue. You have been sitting here since this morning. You have been sitting here since before this morning. The city below is dark and quiet in the way that only Manhattan gets after midnight. That particular stillness that feels borrowed, temporary, like the city is holding its breath between one version of itself and the next. Your coffee went cold an hour ago. You haven't touched it. 3 weeks ago, everything still felt manageable. That is the word people kept using. Manageable. You would come in early, pull numbers, cross-reference positions, send your summaries up the chain. The job had a rhythm to it. The firm had a rhythm. You knew where you stood in the morning, and you knew where you stood at night, and the distance between those two things was the work, and the work made sense. You remember the Tuesday before Labor Day. You remember the light through the window being good, that particular late summer light that turns the glass buildings across the street into something almost warm. You had a lunch reservation at a place on 53rd Street. You went. You ate. You took the long way back and bought a newspaper and didn't read it. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, the rumors were there, but they were soft. Bear Stearns had gone in March, and everyone had talked about it, and then everyone had moved on, because that was the thing about this business. You moved on. You were supposed to move on. Someone in the elevator told you Lehman was different. Someone else told you the Fed wouldn't let it happen. Too big. Too connected. Too much history. 158 years of history. You had believed it. Not because the evidence was overwhelming, because you needed to. The first thing you noticed that felt wrong was a week ago Thursday. You were on the trading floor for a meeting, and someone had left a television on in the corner, and the crawl at the bottom of the screen said something about talks with Bank of America. No one was watching it. Someone walked past and switched it to Bloomberg without looking at you. You told yourself it was noise. You told yourself that on Friday. You told yourself that over the weekend. You were still telling yourself that when you came in this morning and found the 31st floor quieter than it should have been for a Sunday, with the kind of quiet that isn't absence but suppression, people not talking, because talking would make things real. Then, at 9:17 in the evening, the call came. Not a rumor, not a crawl at the bottom of a screen. A call from someone 3 levels above you, and his voice was flat in the way that voices get when the person speaking has already finished feeling things and moved into a kind of operational numbness. No deal with Bank of America. No deal with Barclays. No government intervention. Nothing. You didn't say anything for a moment. You heard him breathing on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Start thinking about what you need to secure," and he hung up. You sat there with the phone still against your ear. You put it down. You looked at your screen. The numbers on your screen were the same numbers that had been there 10 minutes ago, but they were different now, because now you knew what they meant. Not what they said, what they meant. By 10 o'clock, the floor had changed. People came in who hadn't been here this morning. People came in the middle of the night, in jeans and jackets, with the look of people who had been called away from dinner tables and living rooms and bedrooms. Some of them sat down and started working. Some of them stood near the windows and looked at the city. One woman, someone you recognize from Fixed Income, sat down in a chair near the printer and didn't move for 40 minutes. No one was crying. Not yet. It was more complicated than crying. You thought about your mortgage. You thought about it very specifically, not as an abstraction. The specific number, the specific date it was due, the specific months you had in savings if you needed them, which you had calculated once, in a moment of caution you now feel grateful for, as 4 months, maybe 5 if you were careful. 5 months. You thought about your parents, who had told their friends, with a certain pride they tried to hide but couldn't, that you worked at Lehman Brothers. You thought about the person you had been before this building, before this job, before the 23 floors between you and the street. And then you thought about Elena. Elena was 2 floors up. She had been here longer than you, 10 years to your 6, and she had brought you in, had vouched for you, had sat across from you at the kind of dinner where careers are made and said, clearly and without qualification, that you were someone worth betting on. She had a kid, 9 years old. You had met him once, at a company picnic 2 summers ago, a serious-faced boy who spent the whole afternoon asking questions about how bridges were built. You picked up your phone. You put it down. The math was simple and terrible. Elena's exposure was bigger than yours. Her position was more senior, which meant more visibility, which in a restructuring, in a bankruptcy, in whatever this was going to be called in the morning, meant more scrutiny. She needed to know things you had found out 20 minutes before you could call her. There were calls she could make tonight that she couldn't make tomorrow. There were people she could reach on a Sunday night who would not pick up on a Monday morning. You stood up. You sat back down because there was someone else. There was Marcus, who sat 4 desks from you and had started 6 months ago, fresh out of school, who had turned down an offer from Goldman to come here because he believed in something, some idea of what this place was, and who had student loans that you knew about because he had told you about them once in the elevator, embarrassed, laughing it off. Marcus was 24. Marcus did not have 4 months of savings. Marcus did not have someone like Elena. You couldn't call all of them at once, not in any way that mattered. The phone was in your hand. You called Elena. She picked up on the second ring. You told her what you knew. You told her quickly. She asked 2 questions, both precise and operational, and then she said, "Thank you," and she was already somewhere else before she hung up. You stared at the phone. You thought about Marcus. You told yourself you would call him next. You are not sure, even now, whether you made the right choice. The next 2 hours are harder to remember in sequence. At some point, the screen started updating in ways that made people stop talking. At some point, someone from legal appeared with a very short list of instructions and a longer list of things not to do, delivered in a voice designed to prevent panic and achieving the opposite. At some point, you walked to the window. The city down there had no idea. The taxis still moved. The lights were still on in buildings across the street. Someone far below was walking a dog, small and slow on the sidewalk, and the dog stopped to smell something, and the person waited, and neither of them knew. You felt something shift in your chest. Not fear, exactly. Something larger than fear, less personal. The understanding that what was happening in this building tonight was not contained in this building, that it would move fast, that by tomorrow morning the phones of people who had never heard of Lehman Brothers would start ringing, and they would not know why their retirement account looked the way it looked, or why the person at the bank sounded different, or why the news was saying what it was saying. You went back to your desk. You found Marcus. He was at his computer, running numbers that no longer needed to be run, the way people do when the work is gone, but the habit of work remains. You told him. He looked at you. He was 24 years old. He nodded, slowly, and you watched him begin to understand it, and you thought, I should have called him first. You thought it clearly. You did not say it. There was no version of saying it that helped anyone. Around 2 in the morning, you found a quiet spot. A small conference room off the main floor. You sat down. The lights in there were off. You didn't turn them on. You had your phone. You had 3 calls left to make that night, in some order. Your boss, who deserved to hear from you. Your mother, who would hear something on the news in the morning and would call you in a state. A lawyer whose number you had kept in your phone for 2 years without ever calling, in the way that people keep certain things close without admitting what they're for. You looked at the phone for a long time. The thing no one tells you about a moment like this is how quiet it is. Not the room. The room was quiet. You. The inside of you goes quiet in a way that is almost peaceful, in a way that is almost frightening because of how peaceful it feels, as if some part of you has simply accepted the new coordinates and is already recalibrating. You thought about what you were going to carry out of this building. Not the box, not the things on your desk, the coffee mug, the charger, the framed thing you'd put there when you first arrived, because that's what you did, because that's what this looked like when you did it right. You thought about what you were going to carry that you couldn't put in a box. The knowledge that you had made a choice tonight between 2 people, and you would never know if it was the right one. The understanding of how a system fails, not with a crack, but with a consensus, with everyone agreeing that it will be fine until the moment that everyone agrees that it won't. The specific texture of this night, the cold coffee, the woman near the printer, the dog on the sidewalk who had no idea. You called your mother first. She answered on the first ring, because she had been waiting, because she always knew, and you heard her voice, and you said, I'm okay, and that was true. And you both sat there for a moment with the truth of it, which was thin but real. Outside, the sun was still a few hours away. The cameras were already setting up. You did not know yet what the next month would look like. You did not know what the next year would look like. You did not know how far the thing that started tonight would travel, or how many people it would reach before it stopped, or whether it would stop at all before it became something that people would name in the way that generations named the specific disasters that divided time into before and after. You knew that in a few hours you would walk out of this building. You knew there would be a box in your hands. You knew there would be cameras on your face. And you knew, in a way that had nothing to do with markets or positions or liquidity ratios, that the person who walked into this building 6 years ago was not the person who was going to walk out. That person believed the institution would hold. You knew better now. And knowing better, you understood, was not the end of something. It was just a different place to start.